Hello guys, in today's video I want to take you through the process of integrating M-Pesa STK Push on your website that is running on Node.js. By the end of this video, you should be able to make such a simple website that when you enter a phone number and click on renew package, an STK push is sent to your mobile phone, and depending on which answer or which option you select, for example, if I select cancel, I'm supposed to see a custom page that says that the request was cancelled by the user, and the page is supposed to redirect me to pay again, or enter the mobile number that I want to pay with to check out the payment. And if I decide to enter a phone number and successfully make a payment, I'm supposed to see the success payment page. I'm supposed to see the success payment page, and within a few minutes, I'm supposed to be logged in to the dashboard. That is what you should have achieved by the end of this tutorial. An STK push is a network-initiated push. For example, it helps you as a merchant to only need the phone number of your customer, and then you can send the required payment amount and payment details that are needed, so that the only thing that they need to do is enter their PIN. To get started, some of the things that you need to have, or to have at least an understanding of, is Node.js, and you can download Node.js on this link, nodejs.org, and download Node.js. The other thing that you probably need to understand how it works and have on your system is Postman. Postman is an API collaboration tool that helps you interact with APIs. So ensure that you also have API installed. The other thing that you also need to have is an understanding of Ngrok. Ngrok is just a gateway that helps you expose your local web application. If you have it, you can just expose it online, and it's going to be visible online. And you should also have an M-Pesa a Daraja account, a developer's account on Safaricom, and you can create this by going to developers.safaricom.co.ke and clicking on signing up, and then you're going to sign up for everything. And the first thing that I want you to do is go to the link that I've shared for you to access the starter files. These starter files, as you will see, they are basically files that I've created to help you understand the workaround, or the starting point from which I'm starting to work with, even including all the pages that I've already created, so that we don't move outside the scope of this project. So I'm just going to extract this folder that I've downloaded, and then I'm just going to rename it a retro, because I've already a similar folder existing with the same name. And then once you've extracted it, I'm going to open it with Visual Code. You can download a similar starting files in the link that I'm going to share in the comment section. Once that's done, you should install all the modules that I've already used. A quick walk through what you have downloaded is, there is an image folder in the public which has several emojis, like when a person cancels, you're going to show that GIF. For the M-Pesa icon, I had already done a little bit with PayPal, but I decided to comment that part out. There is also the processing GIF, and then there is a successful GIF. I also have an index.js, which is just a basic JS file that explains how to respond when, for example, a button is clicked, so that they can display the processing page, and then how to handle when we receive different responses from the backend to redirect within 10 seconds. And then the other thing that we have there is JS, is a CSS file for just basic styling. And then I want to walk you through the EJS files. We have a dashboard. When someone pays, we are going to assume that we want them to access the dashboard. So once they successfully pay, they're going to be redirected they're going to see once they make a payment from our payment.ejs, they're going to see a success page. And once they see a success page for a record 10 seconds, they're going to be redirected now to the dashboard. If the payment failed, they are going to be redirected back to the payment method so that they can complete the payment. So that is the whole logic of this application, on how you're going to handle the application. The other thing we have is on a .n for environment variables, and we're supposed to, I'm just in a minute going to show you how you can get your consumer key, your consumer secret, your domain name, your business shortcode, your M-Pesa passkey, and the growth authentication token. You also have a JSON package. A JSON package has a few dependencies, which you're just going to install in a few. One of the things that we have is Axios for just querying our requests, our HTTP requests. The other thing that we have is a body parser for processing the requests that are going to be entered, for example, the phone number. We also have a .env to help us import, securely import environment variables. We also have EJS, which is the templating language that I've used, or templating engine that I've used to display the pages. We also have Express, we have Ngrok, and we have NodeMon, and we have path to actually get our paths and then create directory paths. You're going to see that in a moment in our server.js. And you also have a URL. So if you check inside server.js, you're going to see that you're importing Express, and then we have a package called path. I'm going to show you just in a minute how that works. And then we have file URL to path, which is a package that we're importing from URL. And then there's .env for environment variables, and then the body parser. The first thing that we are doing is calling the config function so that we can load all our environment variables. And then we defining the Express app and then the port. One thing that we're also going to do is add a port environment variable here, so that we can define it from the environment variable, and we're going to name it as 8080. It can be any port, provided it's available in your device. And then from there, the next thing that we're doing is that we are getting the file URL to this server.js, and then we are storing that file in a constant called file name. For example, right here, you're going to get a file from C, and then it's going to maybe go to users, and then it's going maybe to go to the Karimakos folder or John folder, and then it's going to give us the entire URL to this server.js. And then the next thing that we are doing is that we are adding this URL, the URL to this package, to a method called, as a parameter to a method called, or a function called dalname. Dalname returns the directory in which server.js is located. For example, in this case, it's going to return this M-Pesa STK folder as the folder where server.js is located. And then that folder position or URL to that folder is what we are storing in that as under the DAL name. One of the things that I probably forgot to mention here is that the reason why we are getting the location file to path is giving us the absolute location of this file is because we are importing, or we are using the meta URL of the file as the parameter. Yeah, you can feed anything here, and then you're going to get the location of that item. But in this case, you're finding the location of the server.js, and then from there, you're just assigning that file name, and then getting the directory of that, the parent directory of that file name. Yeah, and then that directory is what you are storing in the DAL name. That said, the next thing that you're doing is you're body passing the URL encoded details that are going to be fed from our payment. For example, if you enter a phone number here, we are body passing that information so that we can access it on the back end. The important thing to know here is that we are using a middleware to ensure that every content that is being passed here is going to be accessed safely. The next thing that we're doing is that we're using JSON to just have the details that are going to be entered are going to be in JSON format. That's all it does. And then the next thing that we're doing is that we're using another middleware there to just give the location of our static files, express.static. And then we're just renaming the folder that they are in to static. We're just giving the location of the folder as public, and then this public name, we are renaming it to static. So when you want to access, for example, images, you're going to name it as static, and then images, and then the location of your file. And then from there, we are setting the view engine as EJS, and then app.set the views. This is just giving the location of the files that are in views, and then here they are. So this is the location of the file. So when I just want to add, for example, payment, I don't need to do anything out of this world. All I need to do is just write payment, and then the server is going to interpret all these payment from payment.ejs. I'm supposed to display it using the view engine. That's it. You can do the same with React, but I just chose to use EJS. And then the next thing that we're doing is that we are listening to this portal and just confirming that we can get that information, that our portal is set successfully. The next thing that I want you to do is to learn npmi. This is going to install all the modules that are in our package.json, and it may take sometimes depending on your internet, but it's just going to install these modules so that you can easily, these dependencies or packages, node packages, so that you can easily use them on your front end. The next thing that I also want you to do is set your consumer key. If you did create your portal, all you need to do is come here and then create a new app, and then enter the name of the app. For example, you can have such a name, and then mark Reaper 9%. Ensure this one is marked. But if you're also planning to use this app with anything else apart from this one, you can also mark everything else. So you can just decide to mark everything and then click on create app. That one is going to create an app such as this one. I've created an app for this specific video, and then the next thing that you're going to do, once it's created, you can just copy the credentials. For example, you can copy the consumer key and come to your environment variable file, and then add the consumer key, come back here, copy the secret key and paste it there. All the other things, for example, the domain, the shortcode, and the passkey, we are going to add them later on. The next thing that we need to add is Ngrok authentication key. Come back here and then go to your Ngrok dashboard that I asked you to create in the previous section, and then copy this authentication key. Once you copy it, come back to environment file and then paste it there. Also, add a port if you haven't already added it. As I mentioned earlier, just add port there and then assign it to 8080 or any port that is available in your device. Once that's all done, you can just learn nodemon server.js. If if you have any errors, please go back to everything that I've taken you through and ensure that you have everything set up correctly. Once everything is set up correctly, you're supposed to have on your localhost port, you can have these payment.js files being visible. So now that we've successfully set our environment and everything is running as it should, the next thing that we need to do is familiarize ourselves with the APIs. In this section, with all the endpoints that are exposed for Daraja API, this is the one that represents, M-Pesa Express is the one that represents merchant-initiated online payments, where we as the merchant who want to integrate M-Pesa on our platform can initiate an online payment, and all they need to do, what our customers need to do is just initiate or just enter their PIN. Consider Triple M-Pesa Online API, also known as M-Pesa Express, is an STK Push or network initiated push, is a merchant business initiated C2B payment. So this is what you are going to be using to initiate. This endpoint is what you are going to be using to initiate the payment. But before that, for you to access any of these endpoints, any of these APIs that you can see here, you must first of all be authorized. Yeah. So the first thing that you need to do is interact with authorization endpoint, and then once you interact with it, you can see that the one thing that you're supposed to do is send a request or get a request body, and then your headers are supposed to use the basic authentication. And once you use the basic authentication, you're supposed to receive the response that you're supposed to get is an access token. And now this access token is what you're supposed to use to access all the other APIs. Yeah. So let's go step at a time. So the first thing that you need to do is get this method, and you can get it using this route. And for you to get this route, you have to set headers consisting of your consumer key and consumer secret through the basic authentication. So what is the basic authentication? Basic authentication is an authentication scheme that requires that you enter two details separated by a full colon, and then they are encoded. They're going to generate a buffer that is supposed to be encoded to base 64. So this is what happens. You're supposed to for basic authentication, you're supposed to enter a user ID and a password, and the two constructs are supposed to be concatenated, separated by a semicolon. Yeah, and then they're supposed to be encoded to an octet sequence. Yeah, and then you should obtain a basic credential that is supposed to be encoded to base 64. So that is what you're supposed to do, and then the base 64 that you're supposed to get from there, a character like this one, is what you're supposed to now set as the headers so that we can get the access token. But for us to do that, I just want us first of all to simulate that using Postman, which is why I actually asked you guys to install Postman. Postman is an API collaboration tool. It's kind of helps you simulate or play around with APIs just to get your experience around or hands-on just interacting with API. So once you open it, ensure that you copy the Postman correction link. The Postman correction link is just a combination of all the endpoints that you may need to interact with in these all the Safaricom API endpoints that you can interact with, and then come to your Postman and then click on import. Once you click on import, paste that link there, and then it's going to import all the endpoints. You can see that you have make a B2B request. It's going to import everything that you need to have there. Let's get to the get request, which is supposed to help you generate an authentication token that we talked about previously. Just come to here and copy the consumer key, and once you copy it, come to Postman and then paste it there, and then do the same for consumer secret key, and you can come and paste it there. And then once that's done, you can just save it. Once that's done, you can make a mock request by just clicking on send, and then let's see the response that you're going to get. Yeah, you can see that the response that we've gotten an access token, and then the amount of time it's going to take for it to expire. So that is basically how it works. You send a get request here using the consumer key and the consumer secret key, and then you encode them using basic authentication, which we said is your consumer key, and then concatenate it with a semicolon, and then the second key, and then once you set it, you're going to get an access token. So that is what now we need to code up. So to code that, we are going to create a middleware, because authorization is something that we are going to do on and on again, as long as we need to access any API. So we can create a folder called middlewares, and then inside that folder we create a file called authorization.js. Once you create this file, what you're going to be doing in this file is just generating the authorization token. So that is important for you to note out. So the first thing that we are going to be doing in our middleware is importing access, and then from there you can just try or play around with Express. So the first thing is importing Express from Express. Okay, from Express. And then once you have that there, because you're going to be sequencing the request so that we can get the result, we're also going to be importing Axios from Axios. And then the last thing that we're going to be doing is importing .env for our environment variable, and you're going to be importing it from .env. So once we do that, we can now create a constant called app, which is supposed to just be calling, which is just calling the express function. Then the next thing that you're going to do is that we are going to load all the environment variables into the config function, and that should be it. So once we have all that, the next thing that we need to do is just name a few variables so that we can ease the work. So you're going to name a constant called URL, and this URL is going to be the endpoint that you're supposed to get. The next thing that we're supposed to do is name a constant called auth, which is now supposed to be the concatenation of what we said is user ID, and then you concatenate that with a semicolon, and then the second one is supposed to be the password, right? So what we mentioned here is that the user ID is supposed to be the user ID is supposed to be the consumer key, and the password is supposed to be it's supposed to be the consumer secret. So we can first of all do that. I just want us to go a step at a time. So this one is supposed to be the consumer key, and it's supposed to load it from where? From our configuration file. And then the second one is just supposed to be now the consumer secret, right? Sorry, consumer secret. And then the most important part is these files are supposed to be encoded. For example, if you from what we checked from this documentation, is that you're supposed to encode the other pass into an octet sequence. And for us to do that, you're supposed to use buffer from. I don't know whether you guys have interacted with buffer from method, which is a Node.js method. But what it does, it kind of takes a string, and then once you create a buffer from it, it converts it to a few buffers. For example, a buffer like this one, which if you now decode, will return this password back to its original form, right? So that is what we need to do. But what we need to do is that we need to do it to these two, right? So you're supposed to create a parenthesis there, and then at the front here is where you're supposed to have the buffer dot from method, right? But this one is going to have an error. Why? Because we have semicolon here. So the next thing that we're supposed to do is that we're supposed to concatenate them. And for us to concatenate them, you're supposed to use the dollar sign, and then we add the braces, and we do the same thing for the other side. So we add the dollar sign, and then the process.secret, we concatenate it, right? Let me know if you can see any issue anywhere. Yeah, I think that's okay from there. But the last thing that we need to do for it to be concatenated properly, we need to add backticks. Yeah, that is the last bit I was missing. Yeah? So sorry. There's something I did wrong somewhere. Let me undo that. Okay. These backticks are supposed to be inside. They're supposed to be inside the buffer method. So what we are concatenating is the combination of these two. And the reason why we are adding the backticks is because we are importing this from environment variables, but we still have a semicolon here, which is supposed to be part of what we import from the environment variables. And then once you get this is going to return a buffer. Yeah, it's going to return a buffer that looks like this. The buffer is going to look like this, only that it's going to be a little bit longer. So once we get that, we are supposed to convert it back to a string, and then it's supposed to be to base 64. Yeah, that is the requirement, but this one is supposed to be, and yeah. So now this one is going to give us a basic authentication kind of a password. So once you get that authentication, you can now go to the next process. The next process is now creating a function that we can export, that we are now going to use as a middleware in our routes. So we can create an export function. So export, it's supposed to be a synchronous function, because inside that function, it's supposed to be get out, or maybe you can have it as auth token, which is going to be a function, and this function is supposed to have a response, request, and maybe next. And then from there, you can just start working with the process. The first thing that we're going to do, we can have it under try and catch. So inside our try, we're going to await Axios to get us a result, and it's going to get a result from what? From this URL that we enter. Oh, we haven't added the URL. To add the URL, the get URL, I almost forgot that part. Come to your Daraja API endpoint and copy the get URL. So copy the get URL and then paste it there. So this is the URL that we are querying inside inside the Axios get method, and ensure that you get all the spellings right. So you're going to pass that URL there. Then the next thing that we are going to be passing there is the headers. So the headers is what we're going to be passing inside there. So for us to pass it, you add braces and then create an object called headers. Yeah, and then that header is supposed to have this format. You can see that this format we talked about here is supposed to have headers, and then it's supposed to have authorization. It's supposed to be named authorization, and then basic, and then a combination of the code that we generated from here. So you're supposed to have it named as authorization, and then that authorization is supposed to now have the name basic, which is the basic authentication sequence. That's how it's supposed to be named. And then we are supposed to have a space and then a concatenation of what we got from this buffer. So you're supposed to add out there. So with that, once you send that, you're supposed to get a response, and then that response we can store it in a constant named maybe result. Yeah. Once you get that result from these from Axios, the next thing that you can do with that result is supposed to be in this format. Let me first of all show you. It's going to be in this format. So you're going to be having an expires in and then the access token. But I don't think we need the expires in, which is supposed to be 60 seconds, because I don't think you're going to use it anyway. So what we're going to do, because we've created it as a middleware, whenever if the access token is not there, we should just run it again. So what we're going to do is that we're going to tap into the result. The result dot data. The result is going to be a combination of so that you can properly understand it. Let me console log result so that you can actually see it. Yeah, it becomes even way easier to see it. And then these authorization, we can export it to, maybe here we can just console.error, and then you can just have error card, and then we're going to pass the error. So you can import these in our server.js. So come and import that middleware here. So import authorization. No, it's supposed to be auth token. Yeah, that's what you're supposed to have. And then we can add that middleware to this route. So we can just add it here, auth token. And then because we've added it there, you're supposed to have a console log. Where is the error coming from? So trigger, okay, cannot find the module. So let's just add .js. Okay. All right, that is okay. So let us run these now. I'll kind of refresh it. And then once we refresh it, one thing we, however, forgot to add is scoring the next. But at least you can see now you're going to get a very complex result with a lot of other data. But there is an object here called data, and that is what you're supposed to tap in. So you can come into your authorization.js and tap onto data. And then the next thing that which I had already forgotten to call here, is the next function. Because remember, this is a is a middleware. You want your middleware to always call the next middleware or go to the next step. So you can come back here and refresh it, and now it's going to call it and then go to the next. And then you're going to have your access token here as this. So what I want us to do in our authorization token is assign this token to a request. Every time you get you want to access a route, you're going to get a request. That request route is always going to be that request. That request is going to have an access token that is going to be assigned this value. So to do that, we can tap into result.data and then access token. Sorry, you have to spell it correctly because this is what we are tapping into. This is a result token. Then the next thing that I want us to do is assign this now to the request dot maybe sorry, we can just add the space there. We assign it to request dot token, right? Sorry. So now that we've assigned it there, we can just come now to our route here, and inside our route, which is the home route, we can just console.log request dot token, which is what we are getting here. Yeah? So that means we can get, as long as we've included this middleware, we can get the token from anywhere. Okay, you can reload that, and once you reload it, you're going to see, so the result.token is undefined. There must be an error I made somewhere. So once you've changed the order here, because that is one of the errors that we are getting, you can come back to our localhost and rerun it, and then check whether everything is being consoled properly. So if you look at this one, it means that we are now getting our token. The next thing that we need to work on now is the route to push the STK push. And if you check our local host, our payment page that we created, if you click on enter the phone number, and once you enter the phone number, there's a post route that you're supposed to, that's supposed to now handle the sending of the STK push and now waiting for the response. And that is what you are supposed to work with. And if you check our payment.ejs, the sending is being handled through a form, and that form has a route Ripana M-Pesa, yeah, which is a post method. So that is what you're going to be handling in this part. So go back to your Daraja API. If you go back to Daraja API, you have now completed with the authorization API. Now what we are going to do is now simulate an STK request. And for you to simulate an STK request, you send a post request to this route. Once you send it, and when sending it, you send the request body to consist all these details. And you're going to be tackling each detail at a time. So this is the payload that you said as part of the request. And once you send it, you receive a response body that tells you, oh, the API M-Pesa, the M-Pesa API has sent the STK push to the customer. You wait for a response. Yeah? And once the response is sent, it's going to be, if they confirm the payments, it's going to be this way. If they cancel the payments, it's going to be in this form. So let's do this now. Come back to your in your application, And in your application, I need you to, we need to create a file, a folder called routes. And inside our routes, we're going to create a file called Reaper M-Pesa, which is now going to hold our routes for sending the payload for initializing the STK push. So inside here, we're now going to actually write now the code. So import Express from Express. And then the next thing that we'll need to do is importing the environment variables, because we are going to be using them again. So .env from .env. Just remembered something, I don't know. Okay. Then we cross these authorization files. You can terminate them, it's okay to terminate them. Then from there we can also import Axios, because we are also going to be using Axios to send the payload. The next thing that we are also going to import is our authorization token. Import authorization token from that middleware. Those are some of the things we need to do. The first thing that we need to do is load .env to our configuration, our environment variables to the configuration function, and then from there you can also create a constant router, which is now going to be using Express router inbuilt function. I mean inbuilt method. Yeah. Then now from there you can now come to router.get, .post. And then this one is going to be targeting our Reaper M-Pesa. It's going to be targeting now this route. No, let me cross that one out. It's going to be targeting the route that we have when we click on it. It's going to be targeting this route. Okay. So, and then from there we of course we need the auth token, which is going to be our middleware, and then you are going to be, it's going to be asynchronous, and then we are going to have a request and response, and then all this information is going to be passed to the callback function. Yep. So we can have a try and catch to be handling our information. So the first thing that you're going to do is that you're going to tap into the request of this route so that we can get the number that we entered through the form. So you're going to request.body dot this is the phone number that we are targeting, the input that is here. So you're going to add the name here, so the phone number. Okay. And this one now is going to give us the phone number that was entered. And then we can now give or assign this now to the number constant that way. Once you do that, you're supposed to get the function. But because I also want us to keep on logging this result here, I'm going to export this router function. So I'm going to export default router. I'm going to export the default router, and then I'm going to import it in our server. And then, okay. So import router from that route, and then I'm going to use the middleware here. Maybe I can use it a little bit down here. So app.use and then our middleware, which is router. Then I can remove this console log so that it doesn't interfere with anything, and the need for having an authorization token on that page because it's not necessary. Anything I missed, cannot find the module, so I'll need to do what? Lipa na M-Pesa, I'll need to add .js there. So that one should work okay. And then what I wanted us to do, what we need to do is console log number here, so that we can get the number now that was entered, and then we can see from there a step at a time. So we are going to, I don't know whether you can resubmit the form. Okay, let's see how that works out and see whether you're going to get the number. No, we didn't. Let's refresh that so that we can also load the server once more. Okay, we're going to enter the number and then send a request, and then let's see whether you get, now we get the number. So but one important thing that we need to note is that this number has a 0, and according to the number that you need to enter in your API endpoint, in this API endpoint, it's supposed to have this format. You can see here it's supposed to have a 254 without the 0 and then 7. So we'll need to remove the 0 and add a 7. So the thing that we need to do is use the replace method, and then once we got it, we're supposed to guide it using regex, and we're supposed to tell it the starting 0 is what you're supposed to remove. Okay, I've just ended up commenting. I'm looking for. Okay, the starting 0 is what you're supposed to remove and replace it with nothing. Yeah. So the replacer of now the phone number is supposed to have 740 without now the 07. You can see now we have without the 07. And then from there now you can have a constant phone number, which you can now assign a 254 number, and then concatenate now the number that you already have on top there. I hope I'm doing everything right. And then one thing I forgot here is the backticks, so include the backticks. So now here you can console log now the phone number, and now it's going to have the acceptable format. Seems like our page has hit a timeout, so let's refresh that, and then we'll see. Yeah, now you have the right format. So you have now sorted out the issue of the phone number. So that we can follow out, I'm going to create a constant for the payload, and our constant for the payload, I'm going to need to name that payload to be body. And then the payload is supposed to have all the details that we have in our that are needed in our API, which are these ones. So this is the payload. So our body, I'm going to just copy this so that we can work at one thing at a time. So I'm going to paste it there. Once I work on something, for example, right now I've worked on phone number, I can just replace the phone number here. Phone number directory. And the other thing that I've also worked on is part A, because part A is supposed to be also like a phone number. So I'm just going to replace it there. So the next thing that we need to work on, the business shortcode, we are not going to change it. So you can just import this from our environment variables, which is this. So you can just store this business shortcode here. That business shortcode is what M-Pesa gives us for testing, yeah, for the sandbox. So you can just use it for the sandbox, but if you're going live, you'll have to replace the environment variable with your business shortcode. So the next thing that we need to generate the password. So let's go to the documentation and check what password is supposed to be. The password, the password is used for encrypting the request. it's supposed to be a base 64 encoded string, and the base 64 is a combination of the shortcode, the passkey, and the timestamp. So how do the shortcode? We have the shortcode, we don't have the passkey. So how do you get the passkey? The passkey you're supposed to get from your simulation. So if you click on the app that you created, for example, I created an app called YouTube Video, the endpoint is going to give you a passkey, which is what we have here. So you're supposed to copy your M-Pesa passkey and add it to your environment variables. So you can come to environment variables where you have M-Pesa passkey and paste it there and save. So we now have the M-Pesa passkey. What else is needed so that we can create the password? We need a timestamp. How is the timestamp supposed to be? You can see that we also need a timestamp here. So the timestamp is of the transaction normally is the function, is the format of year, month, date, hour, minute, and second. And they are supposed to be in this format. 4 digit for the year, 2 months, 2 digit for the month, 2 digit for the day, and 2 digits all the way to the seconds. So we first of all need to generate a timestamp. How can we generate a timestamp? For us to generate a timestamp, we'll need to create a utility. A utility is just like a function that is supposed to be there to just help you in case you need to generate something like a timestamp. For us to generate a timestamp, you're going to create a folder that is called utils. And in this folder, we are going to be keeping all utilities that are needed for our application. And then you are going to create a file called timestamp.js. Inside our timestamp.js is where we are going to now create a function that is going to help us create the timestamp that is needed for our application. So for us to do that, we're going to just create a simple export function. So you just create an export function, and then the function we are going to call it get timestamp. Then this timestamp is not supposed to take any parameters. And then inside the timestamp, we are going to use to use the date or the new date method. Is it a new date method or new date class? I think it's supposed to be the date class. So once you to just familiarize yourself with the new date class, new date, is it a class or a method? It's an object. Date objects are static. Okay. So okay. Once you, for example, if you check on this one, once you use a new date object, the new date object is going to give us such a string, and this string is supposed to be based. It's going to be based on the location of your machine. Yeah, but for us, we want a location that is based in Kenya, because, or in East Africa time zone, because if in Kenya or in Nairobi, Kenya, that's where the machines are. I mean, the API for M-Pesa is hosted, and it's going to compare the timestamp. If the timestamps don't compare, we are going to have an error. So for that to work out, we are going to use a method or a method called to local string, and then this one we are just going to give it an option for let me check back again. An option for is it the spelling? I don't want to make a mistake on that one. Let me check. To local string. We are going to give it the location. The first entrance is supposed to be the locales, which is the location, or maybe generate the language. Yeah. So we are going to use the language, which is supposed to be N for NUS or NUS, and then the second is supposed to be the time zone, and the time zone is supposed to be given as some sort of an object, which is supposed now to be Africa, and the location is Nairobi. So that's how you're supposed to give it, and then we can just end it to the comma. So what this is doing, what it's doing is that it's ensuring that wherever you are, the date that you're going to get here, the format of the date that you're going to get here is based on the location of Nairobi, Kenya. So even if you use our application when you are in Nigeria, you're still going to get using our Kenyan time zone. And then you can just assign this to a string, a date string, and then we can store it in a constant date string. So what we are going to get from here is a string that looks similar to this one. Okay. Is a string that looks similar to is a string that looks some sort of like a date, and then that date is what we're now going to enter now back into the new date object. Yeah, let's first of all, it's better we look at this one. I hope without, yeah, it's going to give us such a format. Once you get such a format, now what we are doing is we are going to enter this format now into the new date object, like they are doing in the second example. We are going to enter it here. Yeah. So let's do that and get the date. Now the constant date now is supposed to be new date object, and then in that inside that object we're going to now enter our date string. So what we're going to be getting from here, as the constant says, is a string. But what we need is a date object, and that is why we need to pass this string, which is this format, back to our date object so that we can get a date that we can now manipulate in other ways. And which other ways am I talking about? So once we get our constant date, we'll need to get the full year so that we can have that that year, month, date format. Yeah. So for us to do that, first of all, we need to have a constant called year, and then what we're going to be doing now is manipulating now the date. So the first thing that we're going to be doing now is get our date constant, and then from it get full year. You can call the full year method, and then that one is going to give us a full year as a full year object. But we don't want it as a full year object, so that we can get our, I think I'm going to copy that format here so that I can keep referring to it. So I'm just going to paste it here so that we can get this format, yeah, which is a string. So that we can get this format as a string, we need to convert this now from the date object, now the date object it is, to a string. And to do that, we can just use you can just use the string method. So this one now is going to give us a string like we needed. The next thing that we need to do is have our months. So constant month is supposed to, like we did with that one, so you're supposed to have a string, and inside that string you're supposed to take the date and then get month method. But there is one very important thing I need you to understand, is that the get method, months are placed in an array. And what this does, the get month gives us the index. Yeah, get month gives us the index of the month. I don't know whether I can get it from here. That method, but it gives us the month index. For example, let me just search get month. Okay. Yeah, it returns a number between 0 and 11 because all months are kept in an array, in some sort of an array. They are built in within an array. So it's going to give us a number between 0 and 11. So for us to get the actual month, for example, for us to get April, we need to add 1 so that we can get the actual month. But there is one other important thing that we need to realize is that the format of, for example, right now we've worked with the year, it's obviously going to be 4 numbers. But there is a possibility of month being a 4 without a 0. Yeah. And for us to get the month with a 0, we need to use another method that is called pad start. So we are supposed to, the string that we're going to add here, we are going to pad it so that the string itself has 2 numbers, and what we are going to pad with are zeros. You understand? So we are going to pad, for example, if we get 4, you're saying the pad start is supposed to ensure that the 4, which is 1 number, becomes 2 numbers, and what's supposed to add to make it 2 numbers is 0. So this one is going to give us 04. If the month is maybe May, we're going to get 05. And then now all you need to do now is do the same for all the other. So you can just change this now to day, and then it's supposed to get day method. You don't have to add 1 because the day are not stored in an array. And then you are going to get you're supposed to pad that just in case the day is 1, and then you can do the same to other things. So you can have hour, and the hour you can supposed to have get hours method, and then from there you can pad start similarly, and you can do the same for minutes and seconds. So you can do minutes, so can we string and then get minutes, and then you can still pad start it, and then last 3 will need to get seconds, and then get seconds, and then we can also pad start it. So once we get all that, we'll need to concatenate now all these so that we can get such a format. So the thing that what we need to do is create a constant. To create a constant that is called timestamp, and timestamp is supposed to it's going to be a concatenation of all that. So you can add backticks and then start concatenating. We can start with we are going to start with the year, and then concatenate that with month, and then concatenate that with the day, and then you can still concatenate that with the hour, also concatenate that with the minutes, and also concatenate that with seconds. So this is now supposed to, did I skip something? Oh, the hour is supposed to be hours. So this now is supposed to give us such a looking timestamp, and then from there we can return now the timestamp. We can return the timestamp. So once we get our timestamp, this is now what we should tap into. So because this is a utility, all you need to do is come back to your route and then import it here. So we are going to import, maybe get timestamp from our utility there, and then you can just come here. So you can just create a comment here, phone number. So this one is get customer phone number. You can just commit it there. And then down here, you can just commit timestamp. And then what you're going to do is that you're going to create a constant called timestamp. And this constant timestamp is going to call the function gets timestamp. And once you get that timestamp, it's now what you're going to be adding here. Okay. Timestamp and then a comma. So you've now managed to get the timestamp. And just to ensure that you are in the right side of the payload so that you don't get error when you send the payload, you can console log the timestamp and just double check whether the format is alright. So you're going to escape our Node.js and then add nodemon.server. And then the next thing that you're going to do is come back to our route and reload it. Once we reload it, you can see that we get once we are done with the timestamp and we have already loaded our passkey, now what we need is the timestamp. And the timestamp is supposed to follow this format. The timestamp is supposed to have a shortcode, a passkey, and all of that is supposed to be encoded to base 64. So we can talk of get password. I'm going to create a comment, get password, and it's supposed to follow that format. So the first thing that we're not supposed to do, just like we did with our authorization, we're supposed to create a buffer from which is now supposed to convert all that into a buffer, and then at the rear end here convert that to a string based on base 64. So that is what you're supposed to do now. So you're going to create buffer from, and then once we create that, now what we need here is to concatenate. And the first thing that we are concatenating is our environment variable for shortcode, for our business shortcode. And then the next thing that we are concatenating without putting anything in between is the passkey. So we need to load our passkey. We need to load our M-Pesa. Did I name it M-Pesa passkey or M-Pesa passkey? And then the last thing that you're supposed to concatenate is now our timestamp. Just write it as timestamp. And once we get our buffer, we're supposed to convert it back to a string, and supposed to be based on base 64. So what we are going to get there now is what we are supposed now to store in a constant called password. You can now remove this one. So this is our password, and now that constant password is what you're supposed to enter here as password. So we're still progressing Part B, this one is supposed to be the pay bill, and that one we have stored it already in our environment variables, so you can just change it, so that this is going to make it easy. In case you need to change the business shortcode, you can just change it there. The account you can just give it the account reference. You can give it any name depending on your on your application. For example, the account reference, you are told that it can be an alphanumeric, which means numbers and letters, a parameter that is defined by your system as an identifier of the transaction for the customer pay bill online transaction type. Along with the business name, this value is also displayed to the customer in the STK pin prompt, and it's supposed to be a maximum of 12 characters. So you can it's something that is going to be displayed. If it's something that is going to be displayed on the front end, you can just maybe add it as your business. Maybe it's supposed to. Maybe you can add it as your business name. For example, you can say maybe if maybe you can call it maybe John Store, so that maybe you are selling, and then you can have a description, maybe paying for goods, or maybe a description that says goods paid online, so that you can understand that if this transaction description shows that it was paid online. The last thing that we haven't changed is the amount you're not going to change. The last thing that we haven't changed is the callback. And callback now is where your callback function is supposed to be sent. The transaction details that you're going to receive from M-Pesa. And that is what you're going to be talking about in the next section. So to create your callback, this is where you're going to be needing two things. You're going to be needing your Ngrok, or the authentication or the Ngrok token, and you're going to create a middleware that ensures that every time we are running this application, we're going to be having our port tunneled to be visible online. So that is what you're going to be doing in this section. So you're going to create another middleware. So you can go to your middleware function and create a file called Ngrok URL, and then maybe you can call it .js. And then inside this Ngrok.url, what you're going to be having is basically our domain name being exposed. So so we are not done yet with the Lipa na M-Pesa, because that is what we're going to be, the callback URL is what we're going to be adding here. And again, you haven't had any errors. I take that as what you're going to be doing later. So come back to your Ngrok URL, and then you can, we are going to start by having a constant called code domain, and then we are going to set it to null. Yeah? And then from there, we can have an export function, which is supposed to be asynchronous function, and it's going to be called get init Ngrok. And then because it's a middleware, it's supposed to have a request and then a response and then next. And then inside there is now where we are going to be having the modulation. Of course, you can have a try and catch, which we are going to handle later on. The first thing that you're going to do is we are going to first of all initialize Ngrok. And for you to interact with Ngrok, you can check Ngrok inside our npm module. Ngrok npm. So Ngrok is a software that helps you sort of expose your localhost. And then to connect with Ngrok, all you need to do is this. These are the options that you have. You can await Ngrok and then connect, and then pass an object that has a port, an address port, and it has your authorization token. For now, that is all we need to have. Everything else about the region, the path, and then everything, we are not going to handle that. And then the protocol, because it's the default HTTP, we are not going to be handling that. So we need to create an object that has an address and the basic, not the basic, and the authentication token for your so that we can initialize the connection. So we are going to have await Ngrok connect, Ngrok.connect. No, not Ngrok, not Ngrok client. Is kind of rewriting my end. I'm even making the error myself. So Ngrok connect, and then this one is going to take an object that has an address, and the address you are going to be getting it from the process.end.port. And in case that one is not, in case it can't access the file, it can just use 8080. Supposed to just have a comma there. And then from there, we can also have our authentication token, our auth token, and our auth token is going to be, they can get it from our environment variables, which is going to be underscore auth token. So that is all that is needed there. And then from here, we can give this, we can assign this now to a constant. And then that constant, we are just going to call it URL. Or maybe you can call it maybe the domain. And then from there, that domain is supposed to be a URL. For example, before you even do anything else, let's first of all console log that connection, that domain name, before we actually assign it to a request. So you can now go back to your server and then import init, what did you call it, init Ngrok, yeah. And then ensure that that middleware is running inside our router. Okay, app.use, and then you're going to be using init Ngrok. So you have two routers as of now. We can now start, we can now check whether you're going to get the URL. In case we have any error, and then don't forget to call next. I keep forgetting to call next. I don't know why. So that it can go next to the next middleware. So come back to and then reload it. And then check whether you're going to get a domain name console log. In case you don't get one, we start debugging. So let's run it afresh and ensure everything is as should, and then run it again. So what we're looking for is a URL domain that we are going to get from our Ngrok. So there is something that so here we can add a console error so that we can log out the error that we see. Sorry. So that we can have an easy time debugging or checking in case we have an error. Okay. There is one thing that I see that we forgot to do is that we forgot to import the Ngrok. We forgot to import Ngrok module. So we can import Ngrok from Ngrok. So that is one of the things that we forgot to do. So we can reload again and then try to see whether you're going to. You can try again and see whether you're going to get an error or something. So yeah, and that's it. That means that we at least are getting a URL. So you can click on this. You can follow that URL and see whether you're going to see the same application as you're seeing on the other end. So the main issue was how you are forgetting to import Ngrok. It is some kind of a petty error, but yeah, it's pretty important. It can mess you up. So you're going to assign that to. You're going to assign any request that we get a domain name. And then one thing that is going to be important, because you've started with a domain name being null, we are going to check whether if it's still null, that's when we should generate. We should tunnel the request for so that we don't get a request every other time. I mean a different domain name every other time. So first of all, going to come and check whether the domain name is null. If it's null, that's when we are going to generate a domain name. If it's not null, for example, if you look at this one, you are getting a domain name every other time. But now we only need to get a domain name only when, for example, this one has already expired. You're only supposed to get a domain name only when the URL that we shared is null. Let's check that one out. So we have a domain. Let's check. Yeah, you can see that now we have at least some consistency of the URLs or the domain names that we get. So once we have so basically what we're doing here is that we are attaching. We can create a comment here. So what we are basically doing is that we are attaching to request. We are attaching to the request, and then this request is what we can come to our server and, for example, have a request.domain, and then that one is going to console log the request. So we can import this. We can import our Ngrok URL to our. So I'm going to close timestamp. I'm also going to close package. I'm going to open our routes Reaper M-Pesa. So you can import that here as part of utility. So you can import init Ngrok. Yeah. And then that init Ngrok is what you're going to, for example, here we are going to create a comment, for example, get domain, and then we are going to attach, get callback URL, we are going to attach our domain. For example, we're going to create a constant domain, and we are going to attach it to the request and then domain, which is what we have here. We're just going to attach it to tap into that. So right now we have a domain, and then we need to create a route that is going to be handling our callback, right? So here we can just include the domain name. You can just what do we call it? We can just concatenate our domain name there. You can just add domain and then a callback and then stroke callback. So this is just going to add the domain, and then it's going to also add the callback. But we also need to ensure that this route is available. So we're going to create another route inside our route folder. We're going to create a route called callback.js. So what we are doing here is we are just importing Express, and once we import Express, we are also creating a router. We are also tapping into the router method and calling it callback, so that from now there, all we'll be doing is, for example, getting the callback.post, which is where now Safaricom is going to be posting the callbacks. And then we are going to name it just as we named it here, because that is what Safaricom expects it to be named. So that is going to be the route. And then from that route, you of course need a request and a response, and then the callback of how we are going to be handling the. And of course, you will need to export this default callback, yeah, so that you can export everything back now to the server. So we are going to get a response from here. So you're going to tap into the response.body. The response.body is what you're going to receive from this is now this. Let me go back to our from the Safaricom API. The callback is what we have here. The callback now is what we are going to be receiving from the result.body. This is what you're going to get. Once Safaricom confirms that the request has been sent, they are also going to wait until the customer authenticates, and once they authenticate, they are going to post this information to our route, to this callback route. Yeah. So we also need to sort of handle or have a route that is going to be handling this, but you're not going to be having a lot of not less but request. We are not going to be having a lot of information here. So we're going to request the body that has been sent by Safaricom, and then we're going to assign it to a resort, to a constant called resort. And once we do that, we are then going to just maybe give a feedback to confirm that we have just received or we've received the callback. So we can just console log. We can start by console logging the result. We can console log the result, and we can console log it by maybe first of all saying that maybe we have Safaricom a callback received. And then we can sort of just attach it there. But before we do that, we should make it a JSON file. So I'm just going to make the result a JSON file. you're going to use so you're going to use JSON.stringify, and then what you're going to pass here is the result, and then for the replacer you're going to have maybe null, and then the space is going to be, maybe you can have the space as maybe 1 or maybe 2. Okay, so what we are stringifying here, I can maybe give it a constant name data, and that data is what we're going to be passing here now. And once you do that, we can then send a status code dot status, and then the status is going to be 200. And once you send that, you can also send some JSON here, and then that JSON is supposed to have the message, just some minor message, not an array. It's supposed to be an object. It can be an object that has a message, maybe callback received, then once so successfully, and then once it's received, we can also have success is equals to true. This is just okay, yeah, I'm supposed to have a comma. So this is just like a way of just confirming. It doesn't have even to have like we just want, when someone tries to access this callback, they can actually, and we can actually make a mock request for it. But before we do, let us first of all import it to our server.js. I just want to show you import callback, yeah, and then we can use that callback here, app.use callback, yeah. So we can just use it there. So I just want to show you like just how you can we can get that. So let us first of all console log request.domain so that we get the domain first. Once you get the domain, I'm just going to extend it. Okay. Let me refresh this page. So this is the domain name, this is the domain for our app. I'm just I'm just going to copy it. Once I copy it, I'm going to come to our Postman and then create a new request, which is going to be a post. And then I'm going to post our domain name, but then for our route for callback is called callback. And then the body is going to have not encoded, is going to be, just have it as raw JSON. So our body is going to be, let's assume that Safaricom has sent us this as the body, yeah. So I'm just going to copy that and paste it here. So I'm going to assume that Safaricom has, so that just we know that our route for callback is working as it should. So I'm just going to make a mock send request, a most post request to that route, and then you're going to see the result. If there's any error, you can go back and debug. You can see that the error is success. The post request is successful, and we have received the callback successfully. So that means that our callback is working as it should, and it is even console logging the body. So we can be sure that when Safaricom sends callback data to this route, we are going to receive it. Of course, inside here you can handle it depending on how you want. For example, you can decide to, once you get the callback, you want to maybe store, you may want to store the checkout ID, or maybe even the amount of money, and then the value for the M-Pesa receipt, so just in case they try to retrieve it and such information. You may also want to maybe store even the customer phone number and such information. But that is now outside the scope of this project. So once you have that, that means that we can now be sure that our callback, when it's being sent to this URL, we are going to receive it successfully. So we can now say that the callback is done and the Ngrok URL is working perfectly. So we can now maybe here create a small description of, maybe in case we receive an error, how are we going to handle that error. And one of the ways you can do that is, first of all, maybe console logging the error, so that in case the error occurs, you can just see the error before doing anything. And before we even now that we have our body payload complete, we can now get to Axios, and then before we submit the payload, I want us to first of all handle the error. If in case we are going to get the error here, we need to console log an error, because there is always that possibility. STK push error, and then you can just console log the error. I'm pretty sure it's going to be a huge one. Yeah, especially because we are securizing that using Axios. You can now come back now to your payload. Let me minimize that. You can now come to your submitting. So this is going to be the payload. Let me just write a comment there. Payload. You can now come to actually now send the request. So we are going to be using Axios. So axios.post, and then in our post body, this is where we are going to be having the, do we add the URL? No, we haven't added the URL. So let me add that URL here. So let me add the a comment for post URL. So I'm just going to have a constant called URL, and then it's going to have what we have here as the post method for a URL. So I'm going to copy this. I thought I had already added it. Yeah, I don't seem to have added it. So that is what we are going to be sending our request to. So that is the endpoint that we are going to be sending our request to. We also need to our authentication token. We shouldn't forget that. Have we handled the authentication token? No. So the other thing that we need to think about is our access token, which is very important. Access token is supposed to be a comment. So we can create a constant called token, and this is going to be request.token. So we have the token, we have we can now send the request now. So we are just going to use just as we did with the other query for getting the token. You're just going to add the URL there, and then from the URL we can add the payload, And then from the payload, we can now add a set of headers. So this one is going to be headers, and then the header is supposed to have the authorization is supposed to be a bearer token. So as I said, that the bearer token is supposed to have the word bearer, and then on top of that, you're now supposed to concatenate now with the access token, which we have here. So every time the token changes, it's also going to change there. The other thing we also need to have is maybe adding the content type. The content type, we can just add it there, and ensure that it is application and then JSON. So with that, now I believe we can send our request, but before we send it, we also need that confirmation that request has been sent, and you're going to store it in a constant called result. So once the result is sent, this is where you're going to, so we can first of all, before we do anything else, we can first of all console log the result. You can just console log the result so that we can know which specific object we should tap into. All right. So let us run it and then see. So we are going to go to the front end of our application. We are going to reload that. Once we reload it, we are going to get this endpoint. I mean this domain name. You can click on that domain name, and then from your console log, and then from here you can add the phone number, and then click on renew package. It's going to reload. Then we are going to check whether you're going to receive any. So we seem to have an error, and the error is on payload is not defined. Oh, this is supposed to be the body. I referred it to the payload because this is what you're sending. Yeah. So normally it's called a payload, but in our router we've called it the body. So it's supposed to be the body. So that is why we are receiving this error. Yeah. So let us try again. I think we'll need, so now Ngrok has been initialized again. So I think we'll need to get a new gateway. So let's cross that one, and then we reload that one, we refresh that page, and then once we refresh the page, we can come here and then follow that link. Once you get that link, you can just visit the site, and then you can add the phone number and then check the log. So you have a promise. I didn't use await, which is another problem. Don't worry, these things happen, but at least it means that the request is being submitted. So I'm going to have my phone crossed so that I can confirm every time the request is sent. So I've received the STK push on my end. I'm just going to cancel it for now. And first of all, so that we can first of all visualize what the result looks like. So I've crossed that terminal as well. So I'm going to refresh again. So this is part of debugging. It does happen to every other developer. So no worries about that. So once you get the page, once you get the page, you can visit it. Once you visit, you enter the number, and then I'm going to click on renew package, and then I can now come. Yeah. So you can see that we're getting a very huge response, but there's a data object which has what we need. So right here in our Repa and M-Pesa route, we're going to tap on result.data so that we can get only this information. Yeah. So that is what we are going to save on. So, and once we receive this, we may want to wait until the customer enters something. Yeah. So we are going to wait on that. But what happens when they enter the response? How are we going to know that they have either entered the response, cancelled, or done anything? So that is where now, for example, right now I'm going to cancel. Let me cancel on my end. Let's see. The callback using Ngrok works sometimes and doesn't work sometimes. So it's very normal to not receive a callback here, because we are supposed to have a JSON file from our callback function. So it's very normal not to have a callback here once you cancel on your end. But the most important point is when you use Postman, you're going to receive a callback. And besides, if the callback route was not working, you wouldn't receive anything here. You wouldn't even be able to send the request. So the fact that you can send the request, it means that the callback is working. So what we need to do now is plan on how we are going to handle the information, or how we are supposed to know whether the customer has cancelled or what they have actually done to the STK push. And that is what we are going to be doing in the next section. So we've now confirmed that by this point that you can now successfully send an STK push. But we need to, for example, if you check if you check the website that I showed you when starting working on this project, I showed you that when you send a request, I'm actually going to get a real-time response of what you, for example, if I decide to cancel right now, I'm going to get a request or a customized request that you've actually canceled. If you decide to, and then after some times, I'm going to be redirected now to the payment page again. So this whole logic is now handled by a different API, by an API endpoint that is within the STK push for confirming requests. And that is what I want us to talk about in this section. When you go back to the APIs, we clicked on simulate, but there is actually another endpoint for querying. So querying is just keep pushing to the STK push just to confirm whether what is the response of or what is the status of the request that you sent. And to do that, we'll need, first of all, to have result.data after sending the STK push. So to proceed from here, the first thing that we'll need to do is that we're going to assign this data to a constant called, we're going to assign it to a constant called STK response. That is where we're going to assign the response that we get after sending the STK push. And then I'm going to just write a comment here that we are now checking the status of our transaction. We just want to know, did they cancel or what did they do after we sent them an STK push. So the most important thing to tap into here is that we can only proceed from here if the STK response that we have received dot response code Okay, this is capital, which is what we have here, is equals to 0, is equal to 0, which is supposed to be a string. So if this is true, that's when now you can proceed to the querying, because if the response, if the STK push was not successfully sent, there's no need of querying, because the transaction will never was not successful. So we can only query when the response or when the STK push was sent successfully. So for us to query, we'll need a few things. The first thing that we're going to need is the querying URL. So I'm just going to create a constant called query URL, and this one is going to be the endpoint that we are supposed to query, which is what we have here. So you can just copy that and add it there. The next thing is we'll need a payload, which you're going to call query. I'm going to name it as a constant, so it's supposed to be a constant. Then it's going to be a query payload. This is the information that we are going to send to this endpoint, so that it can give us the status of the query. So that status, that payload is supposed to have this information. So the first one is business shortcode, which we have in our environment variable. The second one is the password, which is the password used for encrypting, which we generated previously, and then the timestamp, which we already had, and then the checkout ID. The checkout ID is what we have from our response, which is this, the checkout request ID. This is what we're also going to be sending. So the first thing, so I'm just going to copy that. So I'm just going to copy this, and then I'm just going to add it here. Okay, so you can just tab so that it aligns. So what is supposed to be here is what we have in our environment variable. So business shortcode. The password is what we already had previously, so you can just add it as password. So password is what we had here. If you can remember, we are still within the same route. So the password that you have here, you can just use it, and the timestamp that you have there. So also the timestamp is supposed to be just the same one we had there. You can just use the same things. And then the checkout ID, this is now supposed to be what we have from the STK response. So you can just tap into STK response dot checkout request ID, and that is what we are going to be that is what we are going now to be sending as part of the payload. But this request is not a one-time thing. That is what I want you to understand, because the STK push is supposed to expire within a minute or so. A maximum was, I think, 10 seconds, which is about 2 minutes. So the response is supposed to be captured within 2 minutes. But this therefore means that we cannot send this request once. So we'll need to keep querying until we get the result that we are looking for. So how do we do that? We can use the set timer function. So we're going to use set timer, and then our set timer is going to have it's going to be asynchronous, and then you're going to pass a callback, which doesn't have any entries. But then at the end of it all, we are going to specify. You're going to specify how often do you want it to query, right? So the decision on how often you want it to query, that may vary from one person to the other. But in this case, I'm going to use 2000 milliseconds. 2000 milliseconds is basically every 2 seconds. So every 2 seconds, I want it to query. Every 2 seconds, I want it to query. So what do I want it to do? Once every second, after every 2 seconds, it's supposed to, let us have try and catch inside here. So after every 2 seconds, it's supposed to get a post request to Axios through using Axios. And this post request is supposed to have now our query URL, which is supposed now to be followed by the query endpoint, the query payload, and then we are going to pass the headers as a binary token, just as we did with the previous request. So you're going to pass a set of headers, and inside those headers you're going to have authorization, which is going to be concatenation of bearer, and then space, and then we concatenate our access token, our token, just as we named it above there. And then the other thing that we also going to pass here is the content type. So this one is supposed to be content type. Capital content type. This one is supposed to be application. Application JSON format. So this is the result. This is what we're going to be sending. And once we send it, we want to have the result stored in a constant, maybe called result, or maybe status of, can have it as trans status, meaning the status of the transaction. So every 2 minutes, we're going to send this transaction, and then this request, and then the status is going to be there, to be stored there. Once the status is stored there, we need to handle it. We need to know what is the status at that particular point. So we can console log, so that we can first view or know how the status is going to be returned. So we can return trans status. We can console log trans status, and now make a mock request. But before that, I would like us to also have a console log here, so that just in case we mess up, we are going to know where specifically the error occurred, and that makes it easier for us to have a starting point. So we are going to console log all to console error. Once we get the error, and this error, we're just going to error maybe in STK query, and then you're going to pass the error. So in case we have an error, we can view it there. So let us send an STK push, and then see how we're going to go from there. So we're going to reload that page, and once we reload it, in our console log, we are going to receive a URL. Once we receive a URL, we can visit that URL to send an STK push. Once you send the STK push, we can see from our every 2 seconds we are getting a data here, which request ID is empty, invalid authentication header. So that means we have made some error somewhere. Let me cancel the request and see. Yeah, we've made an error somewhere, invalid authentication header. So I'm going to stop it, check where we made an error in the request before anything else. So this means that we can first of all step on data. So that is the response that we're going to be looking. And the kind of response that we are looking for from the M-Pesa API, it's supposed to be, the response body is supposed to be something like this. Yeah, it's supposed to have a response code, the description, everything, meaning that in this case that the user has actually paid. So that is what we are looking for. But in this case, we're getting an error authentication header. Authentication header means, which is what we have here, all M-Pesa APIs on the Daraja post except authorization API, which you, if you possibly mispress the headers, you'll get this error. All. So that means that we have mispressed our headers. So I'm just going to, so it means it's because I'm using the route get instead of post. So I'm supposed to have to change that to post. So it does happen, so no worries about that. So we are going to run it again, nodemon. Once we run it, we are going to come and reload our local host. Once we reload it, we are going to get a URL. Once we get the URL, we are going to click on it, visit that site. I'm going to close these ones. Visit that site. Once we visit the site, we are going to send a request. Once we send a request, we can go back now to console log. And then on my end, so you can see now we are at least getting a data that the request is being processed. On my end, I'm going to cancel it. I'm going to cancel the request and then immediately end. So you can see that we've gotten a response that the request was cancelled by the user. So that means that result data is working as it should, which is good. So what we should do from there now is determine, you also need to determine when to end this, because you can't keep ending it manually. We need to determine when it's supposed to end, and it's supposed to end immediately we get a response that has a response code. So that is now what we are supposed to handle. So to do that, we can store this set interval to a timer. So let's store it into a timer. And once we store it into a timer, we can call it as the Rust. So we can call it as the Rust thing here. So once we get a transaction status, that's when we should call it. So if the transaction data that we receive, we are looking for, what we are looking for is the result code and ensuring that the response is actually there. Yeah. So first of all, we can create, before we do the if else, I can just create it there. But what we want to compare inside the if else is whether we have a result code. because if you look at all the others, we don't actually have a result code anywhere. So if we don't have a result code, we should keep querying. But once we get a result code, that's when we should stop the interval. So I'm going to create a constant called result code. And once you create that result code, it's going to be needing the transaction.data, and then it's going to be tapping into now what we have here as the result code. So result code. So once we get the result code, that's when we should add the transaction or the query. So we can first of all try that. Once we get transaction or the result code, we can now have the set interval or the clear interval. Clear interval is basically a function that ends. So based on the timer, it's supposed to be based on the timer. So before we do anything else, let me explain the clear interval. Clear interval, if you have never interacted with clear interval, so it's a JS method that clears a timer set with the set interval. This is only going to end after we get the result called. We can try it out, and so that I don't hype it too much and then it ends up disappointing me. So let's check let's follow this link, and once we follow it, we're going to get here, and then we're going to simulate a request. So, and then you're going to you can see it's sending because you haven't sent anything, we haven't entered anything, and and by so doing we don't have a result called from our because we don't have a transaction.data.result called. So let's, for example, cancel. You can see now the result code has the querying has stopped because now we have a result code. So that is the basic logic of how I want it to work, and it's ending immediately we get it. We get the result code. So we can start now giving the custom redirection every time we get a result. So I just want to add to make the readability of my code a little bit better. So STK push payload, and then for the querying, I'm just going to comment this one as querying transaction status endpoint, and then this one is what we are going to call the querying payload. So the querying payload. And then once you get the querying payload, this one we can call it the querying timer. And that being the querying timer, this is the stopper. Yeah. So that being the querying timer, this is we can call this the querying request. This is going to be the querying request. Once we send the request, we can now handle the request based on the transaction or the result code. So inside here, the first thing that I want us to do is you can have different results code. And we can check that from the documentation. So the first result code, if we check from our response, is result code 1032, which represents cancelled by the user. But for more detail on the results code, you can come to the. It's supposed to be on the simulation. Let me check on simulation. Yeah, it's supposed to be on simulation. For example, you can see that this one 1037 is for timeout, but I want us to focus on the major one where the user cancelled, where the payment was successful, the user cancelled, and maybe where maybe they don't have enough funds, because those are the most common ones. So the first thing we should note is that if the transaction was successful, we are going to receive a result called 100, result called 0. Yeah, so we should first of all work with that. So if result called equals 0, that means the payment was successful, or they successfully made the payment. And if they have actually made the payment, we can now rest.render now the payment page. And we can start that by calling the render method. And then in the render method, we are going to pass the success page. And then in the success page is going to be accompanied by 3 objects. One of them is going to be type, and the type is successful. There is a funny way I have handled these objects, and then the heading is going to be you're going to find it payment request successful, and then payment request, I forgot the request. And then the last one is going to be the desk. So these objects have to be the specific way I'm writing them, because that's how they've been handled on the front end of the EJS. But if you want to change them, you can change them. Was processed, maybe successfully. So once we get a result code 0, we are going to render the success page, which is this page. And then this information is going to be sent, this payload, or I mean this information is going to be sent as part of the request page. And the type is going to be sent here. So it's going to be payment and then successful, payment successful. And then it's going to be to have a heading which is going to be payment for what? Payments, and then that heading is going to be sent here. Payment for the heading, which is what we have here, which is payment for successful, which doesn't make sense. So you can remove the payment for text, so that we are going to have payment successful. And then the description is going to be added. Do we have a place for description? No, we don't have a place for description. Let me check properly. We don't have a place for successful, so I can just remove the description for that, or we can just add it. So I can remove this description. So let's have an if else. So this one is going to be what we have here. So let's, okay. Yeah. So let's push this to the bottom, and then inside here we can have an if else. Else if. So the else if is going to be targeting what we have here as the timeout. Not really. Let us first of all have an else. Let us first of all have an else, and the else is going to be rendering the render the failed page, and this one is going to be rendering the failed page, and then the failed page is going to be having a type failed. Type failed. We're also going to be having a heading which is now going to be having payment failed as the reason. Payment failed, and then the description. So for the description, we'll go back to where we created. For example, here we created the result code. You're also going to be tapping into the result desk, which is now going to be coming from this description. So you're going to be tapping into the status, and then data, and then now the result desk. So capital R, result desk, and then we can terminate that with, yeah. So this is what you are now going to be having here. Here as you're just going to concatenate it. So you can just use backticks, then just concatenate it that way. And then we are probably going to ask them, please try again, because we want them to complete the payment. So let's try that, and then let's see how that works. And once everything, so the timer can be called out and the interval is done. So let us reload the localhost. Once we reload it, we are going to get a URL. Once we get the URL, we can visit it, enter the phone number, and then renew package. I'm going to get an STK push on my end. I'm going to select on to make payment. So I'm going to enter my PIN and make the payment. So we can check. So you can see that we have now been rerouted to the request. The service request failed. Please try again in 10 seconds. So the request failed. The request failed is an error. It's a bug because the payment has been done successfully. So you're not supposed to. We are not supposed to get that as the you're not supposed to get it as the page. So I realized here we have 0 as a number. It's supposed to be a string. So you can try it again, and then you're going to check the results. So I'm just going to do that once more. So this gateway is initializing the STK push once more. So you need to craft as many scenarios to get as many possible results as possible for error handling, so that you can check each individual possible reason as to why you could be getting an error. Let me see. So yeah, I can now see the I now have the STK push. I'm just going to confirm it. I realized in the last session we received an error page instead of the right one. So I've made the payment successfully, and let's see what we have on our front end. Yeah, now we have the right page. So you have to customize it as many times as possible. Of course, I haven't created a route for the dashboard, but you can also handle that by coming back to your server and then creating a route. You can just copy that and then paste it there. And then maybe dashboard. And this is supposed to redirect now to the dashboard page once the payment is successful. And that's all that is needed in this tutorial. If you have any question, you can tunnel them to me. But of course, if you have specific pages that you want to render here, you have to specifically work on those pages, because handling the error is going to vary depending on what you're doing. And in case you want to get this repo on how I have done it, you can get it via the link that I've shared in the description. And in case you want to, in case you like the repo, of course, remember to start it. Quick recap of what we've done. We started by creating an authorization token, which is necessary for submitting an STK push. We then proceeded to create a timestamp, which is also necessary. It's an important prerequisite for sending an STK push. And then we handled the route, which is how you're submitting the data through a form, and then checked or added the payload for sending the STK push, and then we send the STK push. And then that data, the response we get from the STK push is what we are using to constantly query until we get the result. And once we get the result, you can handle it depending on how you want. You can display different pages and then redirect them. The most important part that we haven't expounded very much is on the callback. We are just listing or showing on console logging the callback as a JSON, but you can handle that depending on how you want. You can submit the data into your database, and I explained the reason why you are not seeing the callback here is because Safaricom usually has struggles with working with Ngrok for handling your callback. So if you want to handle that callback properly, you can only do that by constantly using Postman and making mock requests, just ensuring that you are callback, so that once you deploy, you're always going to have an easy time. And even when you deploy, you can always use a testing environment just to process your callback.